I will start off by attacking my opponent's case, starting with their first contention subpoint A. Their plan increased the rich-poor gap in the status quo. Income inequality is a growing problem within the United States. NOS 2014. Income inequality for the United States in the 2013 American Census Survey was significantly higher than in the 2012 survey. This increase suggests the income inequality increased across the country. Low-income prisoners are most affected by the prison system and therefore cannot pay the fines and must be imprisoned. McDaniel 2013. Statistics on prisoners allow us to determine how disproportionately low-income men are imprisoned. Data on imprisonment by race and ethnicity provide a stark picture of the extent of disparities. Since African American and Hispanic men are more likely to be low income, this perspective gives us some sense of impact on the being of low income on the encounters with incarceration. Imprisonment also affects whether these men are able to participate fully in civic life after returning to society. Men of color, men without high school degrees, and men living in states with strict felony disenfranchisement laws are the most affected by the criminal justice system. Basically, if my opponent is arguing for prison sentences to be transferred into monetary fines, then he must account for the ability for the majority of the prison population to not be able to pay for those because they live under the national poverty line. And as for community service, their time could be better served by doing GED programs and learning employment skills within the prison so as to help them better their economic promise once they get out of prison, all of which I will explain below in my plan. On to their first contention, subpoint B, they cannot solve for recidivism because wealthy criminals will just pay off fines and recommit and pay them off again. Just because wealthy people have the money to pay for fines and get off community service shows that the abolition of prisons would deny assistance to the impoverished and release the wealthy from blame. Gonchar 2013. A Texas judge decided not to send a teenager from a well-off family to prison after he killed 4 people while driving drunk. The judge made her ruling after hearing from a psychologist who claimed that the 16-year-old boy suffered from affluenza, a term used to describe psychological problems that can afflict children of privilege. Wealth has never been a stigma in affluent suburbs with the median income of $250,000. The implications of being rich have set off an emotional, angry debate that has stretched far beyond suburbs after a juvenile court judge sentenced the 16-year-old from a well-off family to 10 years probation for killing 4 people in a drunken driving crash. The judge declined to give the teenager the punishment sought, 20 years in prison, and instead ordered him to be placed at a long-term treatment facility while on probation because he suffered from affluenza, a term that dates back to the 1980s to describe psychological problems that could afflict children of privilege. And here we see an example of rich privilege, which will be the norm within the propositions plan because wealthy people can just pay off their fines with the punishment not being received. Now onto my own plan. We must reform so as to create an environment for which prisons shall be better suited to the modern world while including the adaptation towards social consciousness. Abolishing prisons is the idea of an unattainable utopia. We must adopt and reform them instead. Herbert 2008. The ambition of an eccentric minority to abolish prisons isn't just dotty. It's a distraction from the real and pressing agenda, which is to reform prisons which simply aren't working. A century ago, prisons had hard labor and treadmills. Today they have color TVs and cells. Jails may have changed, but the enduring truth that they are necessary is not. We will always have a small minority of offenders who just by behavior pose such a great threat to the lives of the people that they cannot be kept with us. They have to be kept apart from us. Ignoring this reality and arguing for the total abolition of prisons is a hopelessly utopian goal that does the credibility of penal reformers no service. It is said that short-term prison sentences don't work because recidivism rates are shockingly high and there's little time for any restorative programs to work. But since the evidence that is longer sentences have lower recidivism rates and provide the opportunity to rehabilitate offenders, this is an argument to lengthen sentences, not abolish them altogether. Of course, overcrowded prisons that are awash with drugs and a system which gives short-term prisoners no supervision or support on release is almost calculated to fail. But this could equally be an argument for a complete transformation of prison regimes and the system of support for offenders when they are released from jail. Over a third of unpaid work requirements are not completed. Drug rehabilitation requirements have an even worse record. Fewer than half of them are completed. If a fraction of the energy and resources are being devoted to the cause of penal abolition was directed to thinking seriously about how to better design non-custodial punishments, short-term prison sentences would no longer be necessary. What do the abolitionists really want? If it's the end to all custody, including the most serious and most dangerous offenders, then we can dismiss their ideas as truly silly. It would be nice to live in a society where there were no prisons, just as it would be nice if there were no hospitals because there was no illness. But until somebody steps forward with a 10-year plan to make crime history, jails are here to stay. The challenge is to create prisons with a purpose. The United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime would institute reforms over many aspects of the criminal justice system rather than abolish all prisons so as to combat recidivism and reentry into the system of incarceration. UNODC 2015. Prison reform is not in isolation from broader criminal justice reform. The UNODC believes that the effective prison reform is dependent on the improvement and rationalization of the criminal justice policies, including crime prevention and sentencing policies, and on the care and treatment made available to vulnerable groups in the community. Reform of the prison system should therefore always take into account the needs relating to the reform of the criminal justice system as a whole and employ an integrated multidisciplinary strategy to achieve sustainable impact. Thus, reform initiatives will usually need to also encompass criminal justice institutions other than the prison service, such as the judiciary, prosecution, and police service as relevant. These include the development of substance dependence programs in the community or psychosocial counseling programs to which certain offenders may be diverted rather than being imprisoned, thus ensuring that services in prisons are not overstretched, trying to meet the needs of a growing number of prisoners with special needs. For the above reasons, I urge an opposition ballot.